the sand, a whisper from a tomb long sealed. They found it, not just a relic, but a raw, ancient fear etched in cursed ink. Now the desert wind carries more than dust. It carries echoes of forgotten screams, and the manuscript's words are not just history, they are an invitation. The wind was a constant, unforgiving presence at the Ghazal site, a sculptor of the very air, grinding it down to fine, pervasive dust that coated everything: the tents, the equipment, the inside of one's mouth. Dr. Aris Thorne had grown to despise the taste of it, an earthy, metallic tang that clung to his palate like a premonition. He adjusted the brim of his wide-brimmed hat, squinting against the late afternoon glare that bounced off the beige landscape, making the distant hills shimmer like a mirage. The heat, even as the sun began its slow descent, was a heavy cloak, pressing down, suffocating. It had been 7 months since their expedition, funded by the notoriously patient and deep-pocketed Al-Khazra Foundation, had established camp in this remote corner of Jordan. 7 months of meticulous, back-breaking work in the ancient Neolithic settlement, revealing layers of human history stretching back millennia. Aris was an epigrapher, a linguist, specializing in ancient Semitic languages and pre-alphabetic scripts. His role was typically one of patient decipherment in a temperature-controlled lab, far from the sun-baked trenches. But Dr. Elena Petrova, the expedition lead, a woman of relentless energy and an almost mystical intuition for archaeological sites, had insisted he be on site. "The context, Aris," she'd argued, her dark eyes flashing with conviction. "You need to feel the dust, breathe the air. It's in the ground, Aris. The story is in the ground." He hadn't truly understood her insistence until 3 weeks ago. The discovery had been unexpected, a deviation from their primary target. They were tracing the foundations of a monumental building, larger than anything previously found at Ghazal, hinting at a forgotten societal structure, perhaps even a cultic center. Deep beneath the main floor, beneath a layer of compacted ash and rubble that suggested a violent, deliberate concealment, they found it. Not another burial chamber, nor a cache of tools, but a small, perfectly square antechamber, unadorned and sealed. The air inside had been still, heavy, tasting of earth and something else, something ancient and dry, like old parchment. Elena had been the first to squeeze through the narrow opening they'd made. Aris remembered her breathless call, a sound of profound awe mixed with a strange tremor of apprehension. He'd followed, his heart pounding a rhythm against his ribs that had nothing to do with exertion. The antechamber was cramped, its walls rough-hewn, devoid of decoration. But in the center, carefully placed on a low stone plinth, protected by a shallow cavity, lay the box. It wasn't metal or ceramic, but a chest carved from a single piece of petrified wood, dark as obsidian, polished to an unnatural sheen. No visible seams, no hinges. It seemed to have grown from the earth itself. Elena had knelt, her gloved fingers tracing faint, unfamiliar symbols etched onto its surface. Symbols that pulsed with a quiet, unsettling energy even before Aris could analyze them. A collective silence had fallen over the small team, a hushing of the desert wind, as if the very air held its breath. Opening it had been an ordeal. They had tried everything: gentle prying, chemical analysis, even micro-explosives, quickly dismissed by Elena as sacrilege. In the end, it was an accident. Karim, one of the local excavators, a man usually as steady as the bedrock, had stumbled, dropping a heavy handpick. It hit the side of the chest with a resonant thud. A faint click echoed from within, and a thin, almost invisible seam materialized along the top. The lid, with a low, grinding sigh, slid open. Inside, nestled on a bed of what looked like desiccated moss, were the manuscripts. Not papyrus nor clay tablets, but scrolls of what appeared to be treated animal hide, meticulously rolled and bound with thin, woven cords. Their color was an unsettling dark red, almost black in places, as if stained with ancient blood. The air that escaped the box was dry, devoid of scent, yet Aris felt a sudden chill that had nothing to do with the desert's temperature. He had spent the last 3 weeks almost exclusively in the environmental tent, a sealed, air-conditioned dome that served as their makeshift lab and archive. The manuscripts, now carefully unrolled and stabilized between sheets of archival glass, filled 2 long tables. There were 13 in total, each approximately a meter long and 30 centimeters wide. The script was unlike anything he had ever seen. It was curvilinear, intricate, almost calligraphic, yet alien. It reminded him vaguely of Proto-Sinaitic, but with elements that felt utterly foreign, primal, almost anatomical in their twists and turns. His initial attempts at decipherment had been slow, painstaking. He'd recognized fragments of what seemed to be a Proto-Semitic linguistic structure, a deep ancestor of languages he knew well, but twisted, mutated, as if filtered through a distorted lens. Elena had left him largely undisturbed, understanding the delicate nature of his work. She would check in periodically, her questions always the same. "Anything, Aris? What are they saying?" And he would always shake his head, a knot of frustration and growing unease tightening in his stomach. Then, 3 days ago, he'd had a breakthrough. A repetitive symbol sequence, a foundational glyph that appeared throughout the scrolls, finally clicked into place. It wasn't a word, but a concept, a fundamental ideogram. It represented passage or threshold. From there, other symbols began to yield their secrets, reluctantly at first, then with an accelerating, terrifying momentum. The language was not merely ancient, it was profoundly unsettling. The first few translated passages described not historical events nor commercial transactions, but invocations, rituals, and the subject matter was disturbing. He'd translated blood of the firstborn, veil between worlds, the whispering dark. He'd felt a cold dread begin to seep into his bones, a feeling he attributed to the sheer strangeness of the discovery, the isolation, and the relentless pressure. But then, the strange events began. It started subtly, a persistent low hum that Aris could only hear when alone in the lab tent. A sound like a distant, massive swarm of insects, yet utterly silent when he removed his headphones. He dismissed it as tinnitus, a symptom of stress. Then there were the drafts. The environmental tent was sealed, a meticulously controlled environment, yet Aris would sometimes feel a distinct cold breeze caress his neck, raising goosebumps on his arms, only for the air to be perfectly still seconds later. He blamed the air conditioning, a faulty sensor, anything. The first tangible incident had involved his digital recorder. He had been dictating his translation notes, capturing the nuances of the script and his interpretations. Later, reviewing the audio, amidst his own voice, he heard it. A faint, almost subliminal whispering. Not words, not human speech, but a sibilant, dry, rustling sound, like parchment rubbing together, layered beneath his own voice. He'd replayed it multiple times, adjusting frequencies, isolating tracks. It was there, unmistakably. He considered showing it to Elena, but the rational part of his brain screamed against it. It sounded like static, like interference. He was tired, overworked, on edge. He deleted the recording. Yesterday, the atmosphere had shifted. The usual camaraderie of the team, forged through shared hardship and discovery, seemed to fray. Karim, the normally stoic local foreman, had stopped making eye contact. He'd started muttering to himself, glancing nervously at the environmental tent whenever Aris was inside. When Elena asked him what was wrong, he merely shrugged, then muttered something in Arabic that Aris didn't catch. But Elena translated later, her brow furrowed. "The earth remembers. It is awake." Elena, practical and grounded, had attributed it to local superstitions, a natural reaction to disturbing artifacts, but Aris saw the genuine fear in Karim's eyes. Last night, the dreams started. Vivid, oppressive, and utterly alien. He wasn't dreaming of his family, or his university lab, or even the archaeological site. He was dreaming of the script. The symbols writhed, pulsed, elongated into serpentine forms. They twisted into shapes that were simultaneously organic and geometric, like microscopic organisms under a powerful lens, but imbued with a terrifying sentience. In the dreams, he could hear the whispers again, louder now, almost intelligible, speaking in the ancient, distorted language of the scrolls. The words were not just heard, They were felt, like ice-cold fingers tracing patterns on his mind. He would wake in a cold sweat. The memory of the script burned behind his eyelids, the strange metallic taste back in his mouth. He had spent the morning trying to shake off the oppressive weight of the dream, poring over the scrolls with a renewed, almost desperate focus. He needed to understand. He needed to find a rational explanation for the unsettling content, for the whispers, for the dreams. He needed to prove it was just his mind playing tricks. By noon, he had managed to translate an entire section of the longest scroll. The section detailed a specific ritual, one that twisted his stomach into a cold knot of revulsion. It spoke of the drawing forth, a process involving the dilution of the self and the embrace of the other. It wasn't sacrifice in the traditional sense, not blood for a deity, but something far more insidious. It described a gradual, willing surrender of one's consciousness, a merging with an entity referred to only as the echo from beyond the veil. The text was chillingly clinical in its description, detailing stages of sensory deprivation, repetitive chanting, and the ingestion of certain sacraments, concoctions designed to open the inner eye and soften the boundaries of flesh. The goal was not worship, but to become a vessel, a conduit. He felt a cold dread radiating from the parchment beneath his gloved fingers. This wasn't just ancient superstition. It felt like a manual, a precise instruction set for dissolving the human soul. He pulled away from the scroll, his heart hammering, a sudden intense nausea rising in his throat. He needed air. He needed a break. Stepping out of the environmental tent, the sudden blast of heat was almost a relief, momentarily displacing the chill that had settled deep within him. He saw Elena talking animatedly with a group of local workers near the main excavation pit. Her bright, optimistic voice was a stark contrast to the dark thoughts swirling in his mind. He considered calling out to her, telling her what he'd found, but the words caught in his throat. How could he explain? "I found instructions for a soul-devouring ritual, and I think it's starting to affect me." He sounded like a madman, even to himself. He walked toward the edge of the camp, seeking a moment of solitude. The desert stretched out, vast and indifferent. The sun, lower now, cast long, distorted shadows of the tents and equipment. He could hear the distant whine of the generator, the shouts of the workers, the pervasive, insistent whistle of the wind. And then he heard it again. Not the hum, not the whispers from his recording, but something else entirely. A faint, almost imperceptible clicking sound, like thousands of tiny insects scuttling across dry leaves. It seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once, a sound that bypassed his ears and resonated directly inside his skull. He spun around, searching the desolate landscape, his heart rate accelerating. Nothing, just the sand, the rocks, the fading light. He rubbed his temples, trying to clear his head. This was it. He was finally cracking under the pressure. The isolation, the lack of sleep, the unsettling content of the scrolls. He needed to tell Elena. He needed to confide in someone, to anchor himself back to reality. He started walking back towards the main camp, picking up his pace, a sudden urgency propelling him forward. As he passed one of the smaller storage tents, a sudden crash from within made him jump. It sounded like something heavy had fallen. "Hello?" he called out, his voice thin in the vast quiet. No response. He hesitated, then pulled back the heavy canvas flap. The tent was dark, filled with crates of tools, spare parts, and geological samples. The air was thick with the smell of canvas and dust. He squinted, trying to discern what had fallen. Then he saw it. One of the large wooden crates, clearly labeled ceramic shards, Sector D, had been pushed away from the stacked wall, its contents spilling onto the dirt floor. Ceramic fragments, previously sorted and bagged, lay scattered, glinting dully in the dim light. But that wasn't what seized his attention. Etched into the inside wall of the crate, clearly visible where it had been moved, was a symbol, a glyph. One that Aris recognized instantly, his blood turning to ice. It was one of the core symbols from the ancient manuscript, one of the most disturbing ones. The symbol for the echo from beyond the veil. It looked fresh, as if carved just moments ago, the wood splinters still clinging to its edges, and around it, faintly, almost as if branded into the very fibers of the wood, was the subtle, dark red stain, the exact unsettling color of the ancient scrolls. He stared, his mind racing, trying to grasp a rational explanation. A prank? A local worker leaving their mark? But no one on the team, not even Elena, had seen the symbols yet. He hadn't shared his translations, hadn't shown anyone the glyphs. He was the only one who knew what that symbol meant. A cold dread, far deeper than any he had experienced, settled over him. It wasn't tinnitus or drafts or stress-induced dreams. It was real. Something was happening, and it was deeply, intimately connected to the manuscripts. He reached out a trembling hand, tracing the freshly carved symbol. The wood felt cold, unnaturally so. As his finger passed over the dark red stain, a jolt, like static electricity, shot up his arm. He snatched his hand back, his breath catching in his throat. From the corners of the tent, from the very air, he heard it again. The sibilant, dry rustling. But this time it was louder, clearer, and infused with a distinct, unsettling rhythm. It was a chorus of whispers, rising and falling, weaving together into a guttural, alien chant. And this time, he understood a word. One terrifying, resonant word, repeated over and over, pulsing in the air, in his bones, in the deepest recesses of his mind. It was his name, Aris. The sound of his own name, twisted into a guttural, wet sibilance, was a chisel striking the fragile edifice of his sanity. He stumbled back, colliding with the folding chair, sending it clattering to the ground. The tent flap, which had seemed so flimsy and inadequate before, now felt like a paper-thin membrane separating him from an unthinkable void. The air grew impossibly heavy, thick with the alien scent of damp earth and something acrid, like old blood mixed with ozone. The whispers surged, no longer a distant chorus, but a palpable presence pressing in from all sides. They wove around him, through him, each Aris a tendril seeking purchase in his mind, scraping against the walls of his skull. The symbol on the table began to pulse, a faint internal luminescence emanating from the dark red stain, throbbing in time with the chant. The wood splinters around it seemed to vibrate, as if the carving were still in progress, eternally incomplete, eternally ravenous. A cold so profound it felt like a physical pressure emanated from the table, anchoring him, drawing him in. His trembling fingers, still tingling from the static shock, felt compelled to reach out again, not to touch, but to push away, to stop it. But his muscles wouldn't obey. His body felt alien, a puppet whose strings were being pulled by unseen hands, drawing him closer to the throbbing symbol. He saw movement then, not with his eyes, but with a deeper, more primal sense. Shadows at the periphery of his vision coalesced, stretching, thinning, like smoke reaching for form. They danced just beyond his direct sight, always retreating when he tried to focus, only to reappear closer. The rhythmic chant intensified, becoming a roar, a vast ancient hunger-given voice. And within the roar, he heard other words now, fragments of his translations, not just his name, but phrases of invocation, of summoning, of surrender. Cathar, Dithala, open the way. His breath hitched. He had read those words. He had spoken them in his mind while translating, giving them form, giving them energy. He had been the key, not just a scholar, but a conduit. The realization slammed into him with the force of a physical blow, stripping away his last vestiges of control. His head snapped back as if struck. The whispers became a torrent, 1,000 voices screaming his name, praising his service, promising what? A sickening sense of expansion filled his chest, as if his very being was stretching, tearing. The air shimmered, the tent walls blurring, becoming translucent, revealing swirling, indistinct shapes beyond. And then, directly above the table, where the symbol throbbed like a wounded heart, the air tore. It wasn't a sound, it was a sensation, a rupture in the fabric of reality. A rent appeared, a jagged, dark fissure that seemed to drink the light, growing wider, deeper, revealing not empty space, but a swirling vortex of impossible colors and shapes that defied geometry. From this void, something began to extrude itself. Not a head or a limb, but a formless mass of shadow and writhing motes of red light, accompanied by a sound like 1,000 desiccated wings beating in unison, too fast, too close. Aris screamed, a ragged, raw sound ripped from his throat, a final desperate plea against the encroaching horror. He clawed at his ears, but the sound was inside him. The whispers, the chant, the wet rustling, the sickening beat of those unseen wings. He saw his reflection for a fleeting moment in the polished surface of the table, his eyes wide and bloodshot, his face a mask of terror, and then his image distorted, stretching, elongating, becoming part of the swirling darkness around him. The cold was no longer just a sensation. It was an embrace, an infiltration, invading his flesh, his bones, his very soul. The red stain on the symbol flared, and a tendril of dark crimson light, impossibly sharp and thin, snaked out from the carving, directly towards his outstretched, paralyzed hand. It touched his skin, and Aris felt not pain, but an infinite emptiness, as if his essence was being siphoned away, replaced by the profound, ancient chill of the entity. His vision tunneled. The swirling void consumed the tent, the site, the very world. He felt his consciousness fragment, his memories scattering like dust in an unseen wind. His name, Aris, was no longer a personal identifier, but a resonant frequency, an echo in the vast, cosmic maw that was taking him. Days later, Elena and the rest of the team found the tent. It was undisturbed, still zipped shut. The air inside, however, was wrong. It was unnaturally cold, a biting chill that made their breath plume even in the desert heat. The smell was worse, that same acrid, earthy scent that had lingered faintly in the air around the unearthed manuscripts, now overwhelmingly potent, like a freshly opened tomb. Aris was gone. On the folding table, the same map remained, the ancient scripts, his translation notes. But the wooden tabletop, once smooth and unmarked, now bore a single deeply carved symbol. It was the central glyph from the scrolls, rendered with an unnatural precision, as if burned into the wood by an invisible force, and around it, faintly, almost as if branded into the very fibers of the wood, was a subtle, dark red stain, the exact unsettling color of the ancient scrolls. It was dry to the touch, yet seemed to shimmer with an internal malevolent sheen. Elena reached out, her hand hovering over the chilling mark, then snatched it back, a prickle of static electricity momentarily raising the hairs on her arm. She heard nothing, no whispers, no chants, only the silence of the tent, a silence that felt heavier, deeper than any she had known. And then very faintly, almost imperceptibly, from the corners of the tent, from the very air, she heard it, a sibilant, dry rustling, like sand shifting or parchment curling in a forgotten draft. And within it, the barest echo of a sound, almost like a whisper, carrying on the wind, far beyond her understanding. But she didn't know what it meant. Not yet. And the manuscripts, carefully packed in their conservation boxes, still waited, their purpose still unfolding.